This is the Demystifying Mental Toughness podcast, hosted by David Charlton, and you're listening to this podcast to help you build your own mental toughness, so that you can support other people or your clients better. Either way, you will learn more about developing this plastic personality trait that all but guarantees that you will perform better and lead a more prosperous life. Hi everyone. Firstly, I'd like to say that last week I was unable to pass on any condolences to the royal family here in the UK through the podcast following the sad passing of our Queen. The reason why was because the podcast episode was finalised and it was ready to be pushed out. This week though, I'd like to share my regards. The Queen was a very inspiring lady who gives so much to so many amazing causes. In terms of this podcast episode, back in June, I recorded this with a friend, a fellow business owner, former professional rugby player, family man, and all-round good guy, Grant Henderson. The intention was for the recording to go out via his community as part of the company that he co-owns, i3 Profiling. It was meant to be the start of a series of podcasts. So as a result, it will have a slightly different feel to it. However, I felt that the content was hugely applicable to this podcast, Demystifying Mental Toughness. So essentially, what you're going to hear is that I'm grilled by Grant about podcasting, about mental toughness, personality, environment, and sport. It was a hugely enjoyable one to record. I hope it gives you more insight into the complexities that surround sport performance, reaching your potential, and a whole lot more.
So for today, we are going to focus on personality, environment, and sport, which is very close to my heart and David's heart as well, with a particular nuance or focus on mental toughness. So David is a registered sports psychologist and has been supporting ambitious athletes of all ages and stages for many years. He is also the host of the Demystifying Mental Toughness podcast, which I've got some exciting stats on to share with you. So David's been supporting, like I said, from talented and aspiring children right up to Premier League footballers, some Premiership rugby players, European Tour golfers, and even a British superbike rider. So a complete array of different talented sports people across different kind of ages and stages, which is really exciting. And just a little bit on demystifying mental toughness. This is a full wind-up intro for you, Dave, but I thought it was all relevant, really good stuff. So since June 2020, so coming up 2 years this week, so big congrats. He's never missed a week, which is incredible. We're actually just talking about it, and there couldn't be a better advert for mental toughness when it comes to the discipline to come up with 120 episodes, which is really incredible. You've had thousands of listeners from 77 different countries, which is incredible. And you have interviewed Olympians, world champs, world record holders, and multi professors. So a real, again, array of guests, as well as your client base. So Dave, I can't wait to dig into some details on mental toughness, sport and personality. But welcome. It's wonderful to have you.
Likewise, yeah, big thank you for letting me join you on the show, and yeah, for that, I feel like a rock star now for that intro.
Yeah, well, it's all true and really relevant. And for the audience out there, David and I met many years ago, and through just local networking in the northeast of England. And Dave became an associate of the i3 profiling personality assessment tool about 6 years ago. So if I give you guys a brief intro to what i3 is, so it makes sense. There are loads of personality assessments out there on the marketplace. i3 looks at personality trait, and the output is looking at 7 personality traits that are ranked from most instinctive to least instinctive. We also look at environmental preferences and what environment you're likely to be most productive in. So that's a very brief overview. Just again, because this is the first in a series, I might as well give a very brief intro to myself. So I grew up in South Africa. I became a professional rugby player in my early 20s, moved to the UK back in 2003 and had to retire from rugby for a multitude of reasons. One being I was carrying some injuries that were hindering my playing career. So I had to transition quite quickly. I ended up in the world of recruitment, which has been really good to me. I also, in 2009, worked with my folks who had actually established I3 as a personality assessment for marriage guidance counseling. So that's a whole nother podcast to share lots of details on. But I helped them bring the tool online, and we developed a business where we train associates like David. Then I ended up taking on a leadership role with a company called the MCG Group, which I still do today. So we run an associate model for I3, and my day job is helping run a recruitment business, or a group of recruitment businesses. I'm a husband, a father to 3 kids, owner of far too many animals, and a tragically aspiring golfer, which is another thing that we have in common. Probably not so tragic from your perspective, Dave, but personally, like lots of golfers, need to spend more time on the driving range and the golf course when I can. So yeah, that's a little bit about me, but lots in common, Dave, relative to sport and background, and I think it's why we got on so many years ago.
Yeah, most definitely. And when do you sleep? That's what I want to know.
Yeah, exactly. Not very well at the moment. As I was sharing with Dave a little earlier, we just got a new puppy. So, for anyone thinking about getting a new puppy, it is a full commitment. It's like having a new baby in the house. So not much sleep happening at the moment. Lots of juggling, but life is exciting, and busy. And like we said, we're on a journey of life, and you go through cycles of real busyness. Looking forward to the next quieter patch personally, but it's pretty full on. So yeah, Dave, talk to me a little bit about just your experience with the podcast. I think it's really interesting when we're doing the series, we're looking at sport and personality, and just how's it been for you? What's your experience been over 2 years? Looking at or promoting mental toughness, I suppose. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So the podcast, yeah, as you mentioned, it began 2 years ago this week. To start with, I'd been thinking about running the podcast for about 2 years, but the tech put me off, to say the least. It ended up where I gave myself a good kick and a nudge before COVID came along. I got some training for about 3 or 4 months, decided, right, podcast's going to launch in the May, June time, and followed through with that. It was blooming hard work, to say the least, just to launch it. I think what you tend to find is with podcasts, sometimes they can fall flat. But I decided, right, I'm going to do it properly, and did a full scale launch, if you like, and it went really well. And then I would say for the first 4 to 6 weeks, there was an awful lot of work. I chose to edit it myself and do a lot of the groundwork at that time. Yeah. So, you chat to somebody for half an hour, but essentially there was like 5 hours, 6 hours worth of work for one episode. So yeah, I did that for the first round about 15 to 20 episodes, and then I passed it on to somebody else. And I think if I hadn't done that, then yeah, the podcast would have died. I couldn't have sustained that. So currently I probably spend about 2 hours a week on the podcast, but yeah, so many things I've learned along the way. Really exciting people I've spoken to. It's been every conversation I've had, I've really enjoyed. Yeah,
brilliant. Oh, it's such a good example, really, I think, of in business, in sport, and life, of setting out a goal, which is a tough one, and probably was quite aspirational initially, and you weren't sure what you'd achieve, and like you said, you're daunted by it,
hugely, yeah. I think in your own mind, you're thinking, well, will people listen to it? Who will I interview? Will people want to actually come onto the show? Things like that. And I've found, as I say, 120 episodes in, I'll have interviewed probably around about 80 people in that time. Yeah. And I've only ever had maybe 2-3 people who've like shunned me and not actually
said yes.
Yeah. But the vast majority of people are willing and able, and they've got some great insights ultimately.
Totally, and it's kudos to you, because I think there's a risk, putting yourself out there in the public domain, with recordings that are captured. There's that part, but there's also the part that, as a professional, you all about mental toughness, and you're exposing yourself. Can you stay the course? So there's that challenge as well, right? Which is real.
Yeah, and I mean, as I said, the commitment levels is a big thing. There's times I have to admit where I've had a podcast going out on a Friday, and on the Monday I haven't got any recordings, so I've had to either conjure something up myself or be a bit creative about it. Yeah. And then there's been times when life hasn't got in the way, and I've had 5 or 6 or 10 backed up, and everything's rosy in the garden. But yeah, we've all had COVID to deal with, and I know I've had it. Yeah. Family illnesses and different things, and just generally a busy life in general, like yourself, young kids. Yeah. And it's been a challenge at different times. Yeah. Sometimes I was going to sat down with a microphone and really haven't been in a very good headspace.
Had a bit of a blank, yeah.
Yeah. I suppose not so much the blank in terms of what I can talk about, but just more about the not really being in a good frame of mind. But once you get talking, then and once you get zoned in, I've found my way. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, it's a great example to me personally. So yeah, well done. It's awesome to see.
Thank you.
So they've talked to me about in your own practice and business, coming along, becoming an I3 practitioner. And then linking personality trait to the world of psychology and sports coaching, essentially. So yeah, how have you found it? What have you done? Give us some examples of how you use this understanding of personality trait.
Right. Okay. So I've got a multitude of examples I can give. So you obviously you've alluded to mental toughness being a big part of my work. If I'm working with an athlete, this is not every single athlete I work with, but a number, I use a psychometric MTQ Plus, which measures their mental toughness, and I'll tend to do it at the start of a coaching program, and then at the end, so I can measure the impact I've had. And obviously they can also see, which is helpful. What also I find complements that really nicely is the I3 profile. It can be a nice little confidence booster, and it increases their self-awareness ultimately by doing so. I suppose I find that they complement each other very nicely. The fact the traits are very different, and also you've got the environmental preferences as well. I find that is. Well, it's so helpful. Yeah,
it's almost the simplicity of it makes it powerful. Yeah,
hugely. And the environmental side. Well, we'll take a golfer for argument's sake. Golfers, lots of them love standing on a driving range and just bashing ball after ball. Yeah, and I'm always, well, are you what you're doing with your practice, is it actually feeding confidence? Is it feeding resilience? Are you enjoying it? Or are you just doing it because out of guilt or like filling in the time in effect? And the environmental preference, just by looking at that, can give somebody an inkling of, well, actually I'm a social person. Maybe I'm actually just standing on the range by myself here, just wasting my time in effect, where I'd be better off on a golf course or on a pitching green, with playing partners, with other people who are challenging me and help me get more out of my practice. So that's one way I've looked at it. Another one would be, again, I'll stick with a golf example. So on the golf course, it can be a lonely place at times. You especially when you're an elite player, sometimes people don't necessarily talk, and there's it's as I say, you're isolated to a degree. So again, if you're a social person and you've got to make sure that you're getting the social element away from your sport, or in your downtime.
Absolutely.
And sometimes that's not the case, because that social person will be on the range again by themselves, practicing for hours and hours, but not really feeling fulfilled.
Totally. And then might call into question why they can't quite get in the zone, and they're probably just, their batteries are empty. You often say, like, you can get those batteries filled back at the clubhouse or with mates playing cards or whatever it is, but make sure you actually, that time being booked in is as important to that individual as hitting the balls on the range and getting the technique sorted. And probably will have a greater impact when you're dealing with incremental gains by understanding that a simple aspect like that.
Hugely. And then you might have the other side where somebody's more task related, and they've got playing partners who just don't show up. And they can't stand that. Well, you can tell them why. Well, actually, this is the reason why, and maybe, well, just walk a little bit slower, or just do a detour on the other side of the fairway. And then you can help them distract themselves during that period of time, be it using like mindfulness techniques and things to sort of ground them in the present moment. So that's the golf example. Another example would be a team sport. So a lot of people approach me for performance anxiety, so how they're going to deal with pressure and the nerves before a match. And again, if you look at the environmental side of things, if you've got a sociable person who finds that in the dressing room when they're crapping themselves, basically, they go into their own little shell and put their headphones on, that might not actually be a helpful thing for them. So we'd then have conversations around what their options are and how they interact, and I suppose try a few different things and play around with it.
So coming up with, it's really interesting, because I think you're coming up with specific techniques that might be tried and tested, but aren't for all, and I think often in the world of coaching, and I think about this across business and sport, or any kind of performance arena, where a coach or a trainer will have a methodology that they follow religiously, and it's kind of like a one size fits all. And I think in not just modern sport, but whether it's individual performance or team sport, you have to be able to accept that different people are going to approach that practice, that preparation, that performance, that whatever it is, differently. And the best coaches and the best kind of performance, I suppose, consultants, whatever you want to call them out there, are able to have a methodology, absolutely, or philosophy to the way they work, but they can adapt that to the individual. And I think that's the beauty of any form of personality assessment or assessment, where you can look at someone as an individual, and I think also, you've mentioned it already, like just self-awareness, like actually having self-awareness as an athlete when you compete. You can understand your nerves a bit better. You can deal with kind of conflict, all sorts. We could go on. There's a raft of things, but if you are more self-aware, you're likely to be more confident, and therefore you're able to probably, if you on a kind of law of averages, under pressure, perform a little bit better. Which ultimately, these are again, like we said, I use the word incremental gains. It's like when you talk about high performance, it's tiny margins that make the big difference. So if we can give like a little bit of insight that wasn't there before, as both a coach, do you know what I mean, and then the athlete, the performer, it can be groundbreaking.
You hit on it there. Self-awareness is the critical thing there. As a coach, as a psychologist, you can help give them self-awareness by questioning. However, you cut to the chase by using the I3 profile, or obviously other psychometrics like I'll do with the mental toughness. And then you can fast track their way and cut down an awful lot of time potentially where you would be coaching. In terms of the mental toughness angle, where we're talking about like dealing with pressures and coping with pressures, one of the things I've found there is actually being mentally tough. Like, so what? Okay, so you're mentally tough, but if you're not self-aware, then you're gonna fall into trouble, into difficulties. You might work yourself into the ground, things like that. So again, that whole self-awareness piece is
totally
huge.
Do you think there's a difference? And this is just I don't know if there's a right or wrong answer to this, in terms of that marriage of mental toughness and self-awareness between an individual sport and a team sport, because there's always a team, behind an individual. I get it totally, but they're performing as an individual. So golf is a good example. That they're out there on the course, essentially on their own, even though they have a great caddy. Do you know what I mean? They're on the range prepping with their coach. There's all sorts going on, but ultimately they're making each shot on their own. Do you think you can get away with, or not, kind of less self-awareness when it comes to just how you carry yourself as an individual versus a team sport? What are your thoughts?
So
you probably see some good examples, good and bad, of both, right?
Yeah, well, yeah. You say it's an individual sport, but is it really now? With sports science, they've got a physio, they've got coach, well, a swing coach, they've got a putting coach, they've got a strength and conditioning coach, they've potentially got a psychologist, they've got the caddy. Really, with the profiles, actually, would be very helpful as a team to look at the bigger picture, because I've seen lots of mixed messages there with some players. And also what I've noticed, when at a higher level, some players think, well, right, okay, so I've now got to the European Tour, I've got to that higher level, I need to add to my team. So they start listening to more and more people, and then they're even more and more confused. So I know what you mean. Without self-awareness, you get too many voices, lots of confusion, and like we chatted, and it's interesting. It's really good to talk this through, because you can put yourself in a position, you can be in a position of strength, up and coming, and then you can kind of go into overdrive or overkill, and surround yourself with too many people. But if what's interesting is, have you used I3 in a sense, just where you pairing people, not trying to choose someone, but you're just creating kind of that, moving on to social awareness. So you work with the individual, the golfer, for example, and then they paired with like you said, a swing coach, and you can give feedback to both so they better understand each other. Have you?
I've
done it. Well, I've done it certainly with a caddy.
Yeah.
Where the player came to me and was not so sure about the caddy relationship.
Yeah.
Whether it was complimentary or not. So we've done it. Yeah, I've done that with quite a few times. In all fairness, where we've looked at both, and then they've had conversations, and then they've improved the relationship, or sometimes it's gone the other way and they've parted company because they can see it's just pretty toxic and it's not going to work. Also with a sports coach, so I'll get involved in coach development, and sometimes you'll find coaches get wound up by certain players, and by looking at their personality preferences, not their personality preferences, their personality traits, then you can say, well, actually, all right, so I'm a practical person, for argument's sake. I stick to my promises, get things done, but such and such isn't. Right, okay, so that's why I get annoyed and frustrated with them.
Totally.
This is why somebody's quite emotional and really gets drawn into those like emotional battles, if you like, in team sports. And it's such a it's
so relevant. You kind of can understand what triggers you, as an individual, and self-awareness, with or without a tool, I think is so powerful. It's interesting. So when you were talking about environmental preferences, so again, for people that don't know, with our productive environment, it's a second kind of output that we have on our, as part of the I3 tool. But it's very simple, and it will measure, we've spoken about this, from task orientation through to social orientation. And the higher you are on the task index, the more likely you are to be comfortable with a level of isolation if you're in an extreme of task orientation, right through to social orientation in extremes where there's almost a desire and a need to be around people when you're doing stuff. And in both cases, if you are in that environment that you're suited to, you're likely to be more productive. And that's looked at in combination with your personality traits. So those two together, you end up with this unique picture of a person. Simplistically, though, it's not overcomplicated. When I was thinking back, just driving here today, about when I was a professional sports person and preparing for rugby matches, and my personality is more outgoing. So my personality trait, high promoting. I like to be with and around people, even ignoring their environmental preferences, and communicate and share and have a sounding board and all these kind of things, and be positive and motivational. So as a younger guy, I used to take the goal kicking or the place kicking in my rugby team, and a lot of that preparation was isolated. So it was on my own at a rugby field with a bag of 10 balls and, on the try line kicking at one pole for hours, And and I knew that to become, to reach my potential, I had to do that. So I was committed to it. But it's interesting now in hindsight, when I think back to both my personality trait being personable and my environmental preferences are social as well, social flexible. So I can hang out in any environment. As long as I'm with and around people, I'm likely to be more productive. And yet I spent hours and hours on the training field on my own. And I thought back and I was like, how do I even reconcile that, because I was able to reach a decent level of performance. And the one thing that struck me was that when I was on form, I had a form of sounding board and affirmation. So if I was to unpick for a coach, or a psychologist where I was at, it was my dad. He was. I was really fortunate that he was always there for me. He was that dad that was at the side of the field for most of my games as a junior, in whatever sport I did. But I would, as long as I could share with him my stats from my practice, I could give an overview. I was able to go into that place to fill my battery up, and it didn't really, and without sounding too cold-hearted about it, because he was just willing to listen, to engage, it boosted my confidence. Sounds silly, but it was like my personality type. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Getting to a higher level of performance, probably building up mental toughness, all these things. But it was actually, the point was, it was outside of myself. It was. I can't say then at 20, 21, I had huge levels of self-awareness, but I was able to fulfill a need that enabled me to perform better. And not. My point being is, if I didn't have that output, that isolation, that time on my own, probably would have got me to a point where then my performance started to drop. And by hook or crook, I developed that technique or method, which really worked for me. But it was really interesting, because thinking back to kind of playing sport, applying yourself, and then linking to personality now in hindsight was quite an interesting kind of insight. I don't know what your thoughts are, with your experience.
Yeah, I'll share my own personal experiences there. So similarly, if you look at my profile, I'm very social, yet I can have the tendency where I can, I suppose, isolate myself by working too hard. Or obviously we've had COVID recently, where you had the lockdowns and all the restrictions on, and I found that difficult, despite doing lots of Zoom calls and etc. But when I think back to running, for argument's sake, so I've done a fair bit of running over the years. I've completed a few marathons, 3 marathons it is, and a lot of 10Ks and half marathons. And I find myself now, because I've had a niggly back for about 6 or 7 years, I'm not involved in a club, and because of the nature of my work, I'll tend to go out running by myself, and I'm not getting very fulfilled by it at all, if I'm honest. I'm losing my mojo with it. And if I look back over the years, being around people and running with people has been a big, really, really helpful for me. So I'm currently in that sort of state where I'm looking at, right, what are my options here? How am I gonna sort this out going forwards? So
awesome. So pairing yourself essentially with the right types of people, or being in a group versus individual, for you has worked. And I think it's just interesting, we could unpick this with loads of high performers today, and again, be loads of your clients that you're working with, where just a slight tweak can make all the difference. Because I think in sport in general, we see form, is something that everyone's after. Have you just with some of your client base as an example, not even necessarily linked to I3, but just in your practice, what have been kind of some of the if you can give examples of small incremental things that have changed that aren't big technique changes in golf, or any examples where you've seen people just have a slight shift to something and then it's led to a higher kind of level of form?
Yeah, well, one of the big techniques that I'll personally use is visualization, coupled with potentially like sports hypnosis, and that can
revolutionize
hugely within a session or two. You can really shift their perspective. It's in sport, in life, you go through bad patches, there's challenges, there's difficulties along the way, and lots of people don't want to go there. They think, if I think about the difficulties, then they're going to happen. Well, I use visualization to counter that, where we'll take them through, right, what difficulty could happen on if you're, let's go with you're a racing driver, you've got difficult opponents, your car might slip on a wet surface. You may have a crash or a bump or something like that, or you might have some technical problems. How are you going to manage that? And then, they'll visualize themselves in those types of situations. And then when it does actually happen, because let's face it, in sport, things happen very, very quickly. The unconscious brain, the subconscious part is kicked in, and away they go.
Totally.
And it's helped them really deal better with those big pressure moments.
Awesome. Yeah, it makes sense. I was just thinking about like bringing experiences or like you say, visualization, things to life, putting things on the table that might happen is hugely powerful. And I think for me, there's a link to understanding yourself, like we said, self-awareness, but actually it's getting stuff on the table that might have been, like you said, subconscious. So it's not in your conscious day-to-day, it's not something that you're thinking about. It's just stuff that you do. And if you can unpack that and you can understand more about yourself or how you respond to a situation, you can then visualize more accurately. Does that make sense? Because anyone can visualize being under pressure, rugby missing a kick in the last minute, or a puncture, in F1, whatever that bad scenario is. But if you kind of false with yourself, do you know what I mean? Like you're not self-aware, you're going to think, okay, I'll deal with it fine. Or you're going to ignore, do you know what I mean? Like a potential need for an intervention or different technique.
Yeah, and I think that's where the power of the practitioner comes in, where,
absolutely.
I would say the vast majority of sports people probably do visualize, and as you say, they will visualize the missed kick or the missed penalty, the drop ball, whatever it is. But the practitioner will take them through a program. So when they're in those situations, they're going to deal with them more positively ultimately, and not crumble.
Yeah.
One thing I find with a lot of sports people, and this is not just athletes, this is coaches, an element of mental toughness is called learning orientation. Basically is learning from your mistakes.
Yeah.
So taking a step back, reflecting. Yeah. And they're not very good at that. A lot aren't.
Really?
Even at the high level, I find. The practical people, the doers, the want to be on the pitch, on the course, and what have you. And again, that's the power of the practitioner, is being able to help them just take that step back, and then actually help them learn how to reflect, because they don't know how to reflect in lots of cases.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I've seen examples of people that are so talented in various sports that I've either played with or just observed, and so they've got the talent, natural, everything's there, but they put themselves under so much pressure by trying to be perfect that they never achieve their potential. And it's almost that state of becoming unteachable. And I saw a quote, I'll totally get this wrong, but it was, I think I saw it on LinkedIn or something today, and it was Michael Jordan, and it was talking about him being aggressively going after learning,
Okay.
and it's really interesting because like his personality, he was super competitive and wanted to win everything, but he makes a statement about being aggressive in his pursuit of learning. And it's interesting because it's that ability to embrace mistakes, to see losing, not winning everything, having a mare, as a learning experience. And I think if you can conquer that, your ability, and this is in everything really, to move on and progress is great. Whereas if you have that, it's essentially like a closed-mindedness as well. When you think about open and closed-mindedness, you can be the best of the best, talent-wise, but go nowhere with it because you've got limitations in terms of how you approach learning, and are you coachable?
And if you throw into the mix, the types of comments that coaches give out and the messages you might get off parents about, you've just got to work harder and work harder. It's not always the case, actually. Having a plan is helpful.
Oh.
What's the point of just keep getting your head down, working harder and going nowhere?
Yeah.
Because really the majority of people, or a high percentage of people that I'll work with, will say to me, I train really well, I practice really well, but I just can't do it competitively.
Can't perform, yeah.
But they just keep repeating it and repeating the same mistakes time and time again. So you've got to do something differently.
So Dave, we've talked around this. We've looked at how you used I3, a personality trait based assessment in your own practice. We've touched on mental toughness. Be good to kind of wrap up around that a little bit more. But in particular, I mentioned that I3, its background is it's relational trait ultimately, and you know that as an I3 practitioner yourself. Talk to me a bit about just relationships in performance sport. So your experiences of good, bad, and different. Anything you want to share really on, and you've mentioned it already, how in professional sport as individuals, you're right, the entourage and team is massive now behind most individuals, certainly that are at the the highest kind of echelons of sport. But yeah, what have you seen in terms of the impact of good and maybe poor relationships, be it coach, team members, whatever? Yeah.
Okay, so I suppose we're touching on psychological safety here, where the best environments there will allow people to talk about their goals, will allow them to talk about their fears and the things we talked about, their mistakes, and that they're cool with that. That is the better environment, and the upshot of that is people go on to trust themselves, trust other people, and then they can freely express themselves. However, that is not the norm. Yeah. And, we're talking sport, but let's face it, this is in real life and business as well. Yeah. There's backstabbing, there's blaming, there's shaming, there's fear treatment, an awful lot in sport with egos. Yeah,
just human nature comes in to spoil it all.
Definitely. How many times do I hear a coach or a sports scientist not realizing, but they might just say to let's say a footballer, for argument's sake, just look at your teammates' stats for passing stats, and they're so much more and so much better than yours. Or it might be like some sort of stats that relate to fitness, and straight away, that because they're talking about somebody else and not that player, players getting drawn into comparisons. And if we get back to personality, if you find that they're very self-critical, then you
can become a negative spiral.
Yeah, exactly, and you start losing them. So self-awareness and that respect for coaches and the team around them is vital. Let's talk to the person as I say, and not get drawn into comparisons.
Absolutely.
And then you've got the whole intrinsic come extrinsic rewards and like fear coaching. I suppose if you think of mental toughness, you would think, right, yeah, mental toughness, I need to try and give them some tough love here. But actually, no, the best way to develop mental toughness is by listening to people, by showing empathy, by giving them some space there. And how often does that happen?
Probably less common than we'd like, I suppose.
Yeah, I think people are looking at solutions, aren't they, as opposed to just they get into problem solving mode rather than the sort of emotional focused role. And let's be honest, often it's time pressures that's the difficulty. Whether if you're a full-time coach, you might be doing an awful lot of other jobs, if you like, and you've got the pressures from above.
Yeah.
And then if you want to look at youngsters in sport, often there's a parent coaching or certainly a volunteer anyway, and they're giving up their own time. So how can they then give that emotional support to the youngster? It's really difficult.
Totally. Yeah, it's really interesting. I think the one of the biggest impacts a coach at any level can have is to build confidence in individual and then the team, if it is a team sport, or obviously just an individual as an individual athlete. And through grassroots, it's kind of like just having fun. We hear that a lot, but actually it's probably the best thing that a coach or someone involved volunteering in grassroots at, whatever age you want to kind of band you want to put in there, can do. And there will always be high performers within those groups who go off into academies and specialist coaching and training, who are then willing and desire probably more direct criticism and feedback. But in general, it's like, how do we get these kids to have fun, to fall in love more with the sport they're playing, and then that becomes a breeding ground, I think, for your slightly later developers, and as opposed to this all or nothing mentality, at a young age, which I think can be so destructive. I'm not saying I've seen this with our own kids, but you see the pressure kids are under, the conversations they're having. And actually, we want to give kids exposure to the good side of as many sports as possible, so that if they are to go on, they find their niche and they've got the longevity, it's sustainable. So I think I've met lots of people who have been in the UK here, footballers, really great young academy players who've then gone into first teams, but they were under so much pressure and scrutiny from such a young age that essentially they've fallen out of love with the sport and been kind of chewed up and spat out. And we see we see the tiny bit who make it through. And I think there's something to be said. Good to hear your thoughts on it, for like, it's not just to use modern terminology, but this more inclusive, kind of less pressured environment at a young age where it's just about experience, and that is a tough one, where you've got ambitious, competitive coaches, which there's nothing wrong with. But I think what we're discussing here is, if you can be a little bit more empathetic, if you can just dial down, do you know what I mean, that harsh dictatorial style, which people see as, there's lots of examples of coaches that have been really hardcore that people aspire to.
Yeah, if you look at the research around like developing resilience in children, not just in children, but in general, if you really need to bear in mind the age and the ability of the performer, and in effect the more experienced, the more ability and skill they've got, then okay, you're going to challenge them more and more. But then at the lesser level, the younger age, they need more and more support.
Yeah.
So challenge and support and getting that balance right is absolutely vital.
Yeah, it's absolutely key. Amazing. Well, Dave, it's been so great to have you in this kickoff of our series, a new series. Is there any kind of parting shot that you'd like to share with people? We've delved into a lot. I felt like I could have gone off on kind of rabbit warren chats on each of the different kind of questions we've posed here today. But hopefully, I feel like we scratched the surface, but hopefully there's some good kind of value for any coach, any aspiring sports person out there. But for that audience that might listen to this, any final word around specifically mental toughness, given everything that you've been able to, I suppose, achieve in your own kind of practice and coaching experience, all your observations, and then also being, focusing through your podcast series, on mental toughness. What is a gem I'm not expecting the biggest kind of golden nugget here, but yeah, just to summarize, what would you say to people out there that are wanting to make a step up?
Oh, right, okay. On mental toughness, what I would say is be open-minded about it. A lot of people can just see the words mental toughness and give it a badge and not really want to go there. So be open and actually, listen to the podcast for one, but do a little bit of reading as well and understand actually what it is. It's about like dealing with pressure, and it's a proactive. I would say it's a proactive characteristic, whereas resilience arguably is a reactive characteristic. So, what I mean by that is, we've all gone through difficulties, I would imagine, with COVID, and perhaps one day you didn't feel great. Resilience would be bouncing back the following day, but it doesn't necessarily explain what's going to happen 2 days later, a week later, a month later. Whereas mental toughness is that longer term proactive trait, because your confidence might be dented. The way you communicate might take an impact. Your general commitment and actual keeping promises, that's part of mental toughness. And the last thing around that is, as I alluded to before there, you can be, it's great if you're mentally tough, fantastic, but if you don't have that self-awareness, then you are going to find yourself in some difficult spots and make some bad decisions. So that's the power of coaching and the power of profiling and psychometrics as well. Awesome.
Well, that is an awesome way to wrap. I think the key thing in there is that you can do something about it, about your mental toughness and your self-awareness. Please, if you haven't already, go and listen to Demystifying Mental Toughness, the podcast. It's my guess is it will continue to grow. You'll continue to have amazing guests on. There's loads of obviously back catalogue of podcasts people can listen to. So get on there, listen to David and his guests. Thanks everyone for listening, and thanks so much, David.
I sincerely hope that this episode gave you more of a flavour for the work of an applied sports psychologist, the background, the planning, and the work that goes into producing a podcast and prepping and preparing and doing the work with clients. More importantly, I hope that you picked up some really helpful ideas to get better at what you do or to be more fulfilled. One last thing to note before we do wrap up is if you're a parent or a coach involved in youth sport, you might want to sign up to a short and snappy weekly tips. It's called Conversations with Kids. It's going to help you very slowly open your children's mind and with some luck, play a small part in developing their mental strength over a period. The tips are essentially very short ideas with prompts for having casual chats with your kids at the dinner table, in the car, or when you're on the go. The first one is set to go out live next Saturday, September the 24th. You'll find details in the show notes to sign up. If you enjoyed this episode of the Demystifying Mental Toughness podcast with David Charlton, do check out my website, sport-excellence.co.uk, and my online sports psychology resources. The Sport-Excellence website has essential resources for anyone looking to build their own mental toughness or the mental toughness of their athletes or teams, or if you want to achieve peak performance more often or optimal functioning. The Sport Excellence website has everything you need to keep moving forward and thrive. So go on, head over to sport-excellence.co.uk to find out more.